again, guys, I would like to say thank you for coming to my website, and thank you for purchasing the full-length video. I'm certain that you'll enjoy it. Again, my name is Kyle Fitro. I've been a cop and a drug educator for nearly 14 years, with a large portion of that 14 years being dedicated to narcotics enforcement. And like I said in the introduction on the homepage, what I want to do is take those 14 years and compress it into this video for you. Basically, a crash course on drugs. Now, I'm not going to cover every single drug known to man because that would take us weeks. But what I do want to do are cover all the drugs that are likely to affect you in your day-to-day life. Another thing I want to explain is that in a previous version of this video, when we went through each drug, I explained to you the drug detection times in urine, meaning if you're a parent and you wanted to test your children, how long would these drugs remain in their system? What we're going to do this time around, I think, will be easier. We're going to place all of these drug detection times into a table on the website, and it will be more comprehensive and not included in the video. So if you're looking for drug detection times, check the table on the actual website. Another thing I want to do as well is in regards to slang. I do not want to explain every bit of slang regarding every drug with you, because the problem is you could have a group of 3 guys that develop a particular slang for a particular drug, and it's only known by those 3. And slang is ever evolving to the point that it's nearly impossible to keep up with, especially in particular pockets of people. So what we can do is also add a table with the currently known slang on the page. Now, before we get into the actual drugs themselves, I want to talk to you a little bit about drug testing. Drugs can be detected a number of ways: through hair, urine, blood, fingernails, sweat. Most commonly, though, it is blood or urine. And what I want you parents especially to know out there is if you feel like that there's a problem or you're worried that there's a problem with your kids, don't be afraid to test them. A lot of parents are really afraid to do this. There are a couple of different ways. One would be the straightforward way, where you go to the pharmacy, you purchase a urine home drug test kit, and you have your kid pee in the cup, and you can test them with instant results right in the home. The other way can be a little bit more covert, which would be a home hair drug test kit, where you, if your child is sleeping or whatnot, you can remove hair from their head, put it into the packet, send it to the lab, and then they will send you back results. The major difference between the two: the hair is going to go back further, meaning hair you're usually going to pick up anything they've ingested within the last 90 days, whereas urine is going to be a much more brief time frame. So just another thing for you parents to keep in mind, that those options are available to you, and if you suspect that there's a problem, I encourage you to take that route and find out for sure. Okay, one more thing prior to getting into the drugs themselves that I would like to talk about are some pretty unique hiding places for drugs. You can find all of these items online. They're very easy to buy simply by searching the term can safes. They do have legitimate purposes for homeowners in regards to burglary prevention, if you will. But a lot of times in the police world, we find these people hiding drugs and money in them. So I just wanted to go over a few of them with you. This is not all-inclusive. Guys, if you can imagine the object, they've been converted into a can safe. So if you get online, you check them out for yourself, you'll see the great variety. But I just wanted to give you an idea of some of these so you can see them for yourself. The first one is just a Dr. Pepper can, and obviously the company is doing this, or probably some sort of trademark infringement, but it happens all the time. The can is weighted. It feels proper, like a can of Dr. Pepper. Everything looks normal, but the top screws off, the inside is hollow, and obviously you can put whatever you want in there. Another one of them would be a bottle of water. If you look at the writing on there, it's exactly like what you would find in a store. This is real water. If you pull it apart, though, there are 2 compartments in there. Water in the top, water in the bottom, hollow in the middle. You put it back together, and great place to hide stuff. Another one would be the salt shaker. The exterior, 2 separate compartments, and there is real salt in there. But if you take off the lid, you'll find that the inside is hollow, just like the other devices. Another one is this can of Pringles. If you take the top off, this one's kind of cool because if you actually open it, inside are real Pringles, all the way down to about here. But when you open the bottom, it's hollow. Shaving cream, same thing. This can is not weighted. If you pick it up, it feels like it's empty, and it is not functional. If you push it, shaving cream does not come out. But if it's just sitting in a cabinet, you probably wouldn't even look at it twice. The bottom comes off, and again, just like the other devices. And what you'll find if you look at these in person is the seam on these are flawless. You can look at it this close and you cannot see the seam. It looks exactly like it should. Another one, which is, I think, one of my favorites, is a candle. If you feel it, it's heavy, just like a regular candle. And it is lightable. You can use it, you can burn it to about down to here. When you take the label off the bottom, what they've done is basically taken a soup can and covered it in wax. So you can burn it, put all of your things in there. And it's really fairly ingenious because sitting on a mantle burning with a pool of wax in it, who would ever suspect that it's not what it's supposed to be? This is a strip outlet surge protector. Obviously, you've all seen one of these. You can plug it into the wall. You can flip on the switch and the light comes on. You can plug items into it. It's not functional. It will not power the devices, but it certainly looks the part. But the bottom comes off. It's hollow. But if you think about it, this on the floor with the tangle of wires that you see under most people's computers, under their computers, would be quite deceiving. Another one, this is an actual mouse. It does work. You can plug it into your computer and do everything. But if you pop off this section and take off the cover, it becomes a digital scale to weigh what we usually see your drugs on. And then you can put it back together and continue to use it as a mouse. And it charges when you plug it in through the USB cord. This one we've seen in a few houses. It's really pretty slick. It's what they call it a hidden wall safe. And what it is, it's an outlet. What people do is you cut a small hole into the drywall, you insert this, put it into the wall. You can plug things in it. Obviously, it's non-functional, but you could plug a lamp into it. And for all intents and purposes, it looks like a real deal outlet. When you fold it down, this is actually a small, this screw, they have a small key that goes in there. You turn it a half turn, it's spring-loaded, and it releases, and then there's a big compartment behind it that folds out forward to put all of your stuff in. Really pretty slick. This one is a touch light, similar to what you see in some of the infomercials on TV. It does work. And if you open it, it's hollow on the inside. It's got mounting holes here and here, so you can actually mount it with screws to the wall inside of your closet, whatnot, and put anything you want in there. So I just want you people to, especially you parents with kids, these things are a little more common than you might think they are. And I don't want you to overlook that they do exist and to maybe pay a little closer attention to some of the items that you think are common items that may not be. Get online, check it out for yourself, and you will be amazed at the wide variety of items very much like this that you will find. All right, now that we've already talked a little bit about drug testing and some unique places to hide your drugs, I want to explain to you what designer drugs are. Some of the hot topics lately have been bath salts and synthetic marijuana, both of them being designer drugs. So you need to understand what actually is a designer drug. Well, what happens is when the DEA outlaws a particular drug, they do so not only by its name, but by its chemical composition. So what happens is that chemists look at these compositions, and if they can create a substance that, say, looks like cocaine, acts like cocaine, has similar effects on the human body as cocaine, but has a different molecular structure or composition than the one that's illegal, well, now they've got something. This is a legal product that you can market, you can sell. But what happens when they do that is the government eventually catches up, bans that substance, and this becomes a very large cat and mouse game between the underground chemists and law enforcement. The chemists are constantly creating new compounds to kind of skirt the laws. Most of these designer drugs you have never even heard of because most of them never rise to levels of prominence. They don't work, they're ineffective, they're deadly, and they never really get off the ground and people never hear about them. But there have been hundreds of them over the period of a number of past years. So now that you understand exactly what a designer drug is, let's talk about the two most popular designer drugs right now, bath salts and synthetic marijuana. All right, now that I've given you the overview on what designer drugs are, let's talk about one of the more popular ones in recent history, which would be bath salts. What you have to understand is that bath salts are not the bath salts that you and I would think of. They're not Epsom salts. They're not Calgon Take Me Away type bath salts. What they are is a designer drug named bath salts simply for marketing purposes. Generally what they do on the packaging is write not for human consumption to kind of get around some of the legal issues. And they will also label the containers as plant food, like it's supposed to be a fertilizer. But actually what it is a designer drug. It comes in a white powdery form, generally speaking. It's not always white. There are color variations, but generally for $25 to $50, you're going to get a very small amount of powder. You know, if you threw it in the bathtub, it wouldn't do you any good anyway because it's such a small amount. On September the 7th, 2011, all currently known formulations of bath salts were outlawed by the DEA. But initially, the big appeal why this drug was so popular was a couple of different things. Number one, it was legal. You could go to the carryouts, the convenience stores, and you could buy this drug legally, drive around with it, without any fear of arrest or prosecution. The secondary appeal of the drug was that it didn't show up on any drug screens. So if you were to do the drug over the weekend and your employer submits you to a random urinalysis on, say, Monday morning, you would pass. Now, after the substance has been banned, which it is now, the world is kind of catching up and the drug screens are catching up as well. So some of the more modern, sophisticated drug screens do test for bath salts and do detect those. Another issue with bath salts is that science has yet to truly define what they are, meaning to categorize it as a stimulant, a hallucinogen, a depressant. Most often they're categorized as a stimulant with some other properties. I can tell you just from personal experience, some of the drug users that I know and have talked to, after they've tried bath salts, they don't like them. They don't seem to want to do them again. So that's some testament to that type of drug if hardcore heroin addicts have tried bath salts and don't want to do them again. But the other thing that I want to explain that will kind of go through the rest of this whole video is that bath salts are water soluble, meaning they can be dissolved in water. And anytime a drug is water soluble, that means you can ingest it a number of different ways. You can smoke it, you can inject it, you can snort it, or you can eat it. Bath salts themselves are usually going to be snorted, injected, or smoked. I've seen it all three ways. When people snort bath salts, just like they would cocaine, just like you would smoke cocaine or inject cocaine. But the effects of bath salts seem to be dramatically different. A lot of law enforcement report violent encounters with people high on bath salts, people believing that there are bugs coming out of their face, different things. So overall, they do not seem to be something that has stuck around. For at least in my personal experience, they were very, very popular and quickly fizzled and have kind of went away. Let's move on to another designer drug that has gained national prominence, which is synthetic marijuana. And it goes by mostly three names, G14, K2, and Spice. But what you have to understand is there are many, many, many variations of synthetic marijuana, all called by those names. I want you to think of facial tissue. Everybody just calls them Kleenex, although that's truly not their name if you're buying an off-brand. So what happened was these were the first 3 brands to rise to national prominence, G14, K2, and Spice, and now that's kind of the genericized name for all of them. Synthetic marijuana, what it is it is a kind of almost looks like a potpourri type substance. And what they do is spray the potpourri type substance with a synthetic cannabinoid, or basically, without going into the pharmacy side of things, a synthetic THC onto this substance. And then the user smokes this substance exactly like they would normal marijuana. Just like normal marijuana, you can't inject it or snort it. It's always smoked or eaten. Again, just like the bath salts, they will label the packages not for human consumption to try to skirt some of the laws, and they sell it as potpourri, but everybody knows what it's used for. On December 24th of 2010, this substance was as well outlawed by the DEA, all of the currently known molecular compounds that go into synthetic marijuana. But here again, we're going to probably end up in a situation in which chemists can come up with new molecular formulations that will get one step ahead of these laws, and it's this constant game. Very similar to bath salts, the appeal to synthetic marijuana when it came out was just like the other, that it was legal. It could be obtained pretty much anywhere cigarettes could, and again, not detectable on traditional drug screens. So you could, for lack of a better phrase, smoke marijuana all the time and get away with it if you are subject to random urinalysis. Very similar to bath salts again, science is catching up, employers are catching up, and this is starting to become included in these drug screen panels. So the days of kind of smoking it and getting away with it are quickly fading. Another thing I wanted to touch on, like I said, that synthetic marijuana is smoked out of the same devices that real marijuana is. And if you stick around towards the end of the video when we cover marijuana, I want to show you some really neat, kind of tricky pipes that look like everyday items that are actually smoking pipes. And we'll get to that here in a little bit. In this section, I want to talk about some of the drug trends that are popular with younger people, some of the things they may be using that you have never heard of. There are 3 of them that I would like to cover, and the first one is promethazine with codeine cough syrup, also known as Phenergan with codeine cough syrup, but on the street, if you will, people will call it Sizzurp or purple drank. And what it is, promethazine with codeine cough syrup is a prescription cough syrup, really fairly common. I've had it prescribed for my own kids when they have coughs and different things. But what people do with them, or with this cough syrup, is they'll drink it, but in a very particular way. Generally what happens, a couple different ways. Let's talk about a few of them. The first way would be to buy a 20-ounce bottle of Sprite. What people will do is pour out, say, 4 ounces of the Sprite, pour in 4 ounces of the promethazine with codeine cough syrup, maybe add a few Jolly Ranchers into the drink so it doesn't taste so bad, because this cough syrup does not taste very well. And then you drink all of this pop and you get a very sedated type effect from this drug. Another way is the same mixture, but they'll use styrofoam cups. If you've ever seen this cough syrup, it has kind of a purplish, pinkish color to it. So if you are finding the white styrofoam cups, the really cheap ones you can buy at any store, and they are empty but they are stained purple or pink, that's something that you should be aware of. Now, this particular cough syrup is obviously prescription, but it is common enough that people have it in their medicine cabinets, and the younger generation does seem to abuse this particular syrup. And one of the reasons is that it's become very glamorized and popularized in rap culture. If you listen to a lot of the songs that your kids are possibly listening to, a lot of these rap artists sing about Sizzurp or purple drank. If you search these terms on the internet, Sizzurp or purple drank, you will understand what I'm talking about. But a lot of these songs have references to this particular mixture in it. Some very well-known hip-hop artists have been addicted to this substance and have come out publicly and talked about it. So not something that maybe to epidemic proportions, but something that you should be aware of that your kids may be involved in. Okay, another one of the trends among younger people that really isn't a drug are solvents or huffing. And what I want you parents to remember about this is it's not extraordinarily widespread, but this is one of them that is a little bit concerning because let's say a lot of you say, you know, you watch this video and you think, yeah, my kids are really good kids, they're in sports, they wouldn't do any of this. But this is the one thing that a lot of kids don't look at is, well, you know, it's not heroin, it's not cocaine, it's really not that bad. And they might try huffing some of these solvents. The first of which I'd like to explain to you is pretty common, is compressed air in a can. People use it all the time to take the little tube off, put it in, spray out their keyboards on their computers. And what people will do are a couple different things. Number one, you could take this compressed air or any other liquid solvent and you could spray it on your clothing, get your clothing wet, and then inhale it right through your shirt sleeve or any other piece of clothing. Another way that people will do it is to place a plastic bag over their head, tie off the bag with their hand, take the solvent, shoot it up into the bag, and begin to inhale the vapors. I think the problems with that are probably pretty obvious, is that it suppresses the respiratory system to the point that death can happen very quickly. And this is one of those things that can be happening in your own home and you may well be unaware. A lot of the deaths that have happened with solvents and with huffing have been with good kids, kids that are not drug addict type kids or problematic kids. And I want you to remember as well that almost any chemical or solution that gives off a vapor can be huffed. Correction fluid that we've all used, the whiteout style correction fluid, people can place that into bags, inhale the vapors that way. You can take the large permanent markers, and if you take the guts out, you can put those into a bag and inhale the vapors that way. So again, it's not something that is to epidemic proportions or widespread, but it is something that has unfortunately taken the lives of many young people, and a lot of them were very good kids. The third of the substances I want to talk about in regards to some of the younger people drug trends is dextromethorphan, or most people call it DXM. It is found in many common over-the-counter cold preparations, the liquid, the bottles of cough syrup. And when you're in the pharmacy next time, look at all these different bottles of cough syrup, turn them around and look at the list of ingredients. And sometimes they will abbreviate it DXM, or they'll spell it out, dextromethorphan. Not all of them have it, but a number of them do. And what people do with it is very simple. Rather than taking 2 or 3 tablespoons, teaspoons, whatever the bottle tells you to take, they'll just drink half the bottle or the entire bottle all in one sitting. This causes them to go into a very sedated trip kind of high, but it's fairly common amongst young people because it's very obtainable. You can walk into any pharmacy, Walmart, wherever you want to go, and you can buy these preparations, so they're relatively easy to get and very simple to use. All you have to do is drink a whole lot more than you're supposed to. So parents, another thing, just keep in mind, if you have a bunch of cough syrups in the cabinet that have dextromethorphan in them, just another thing to keep an eye on to make sure it's not disappearing, or if you're finding empty bottles around, that could be what's occurring. Now I'd like to get into opiates in general. In a minute here, I'll break them into basically 2 different veins, if you will, meaning heroin and pharmaceutical opiates. But first, let's just talk about opiates in general. A couple different things. It's interesting to note that nearly all opiate-based products in existence today come from the original source of the gum that is excreted from the poppy plant. Maybe not directly, but they are either a direct derivative of that gum that comes out of the poppy plant. That is the inspiration for it, or synthesized compounds that come from this. But that is kind of ground zero for all of these opiates. And what you guys have to understand when we're talking about opiates in general, when you compare heroin to pain pills, is they are, from an addict's perspective, very much interchangeable. Meaning, and here's the way to think about it. If you know somebody who's an alcoholic and their drink of choice is Jack Daniels, and that's all they want to drink, but on this particular day they're out of Jack and all they've got's vodka, it'll do the trick. Might not be their drug of choice or drink of choice, but it will do the trick. Heroin and pain pills are very much the same. Here is how, in this country, it's kind of become an epidemic in regards to heroin and pain pills, and we see a lot of overdose deaths. And with all the opiates, all the people die the same way. The opiates are a depressant, to the point that if you take too much, it suppresses your respiratory system to the point that you simply forget to breathe. It's really that easy. So if you have somebody in your life who is an opiate addict and you find them laying down, almost looks like they're asleep, but they are struggling to breathe, or that intermittent type breathing, you need to call rescue right away. And what they do is administer a drug called naloxone or Narcan. What's interesting about that is when injected with Narcan, it destroys all of the opiates in the body immediately. And it's very, very amazing, really. You can encounter somebody that's overdosed on opiates, whether it's heroin or pain pills. You'll find them blue, unresponsive, foaming at the mouth. And if you're quick enough and you give them an injection of Narcan, within about 60 seconds, they're back from the dead, up walking and talking. And believe it or not, we've had individuals who are very upset because you immediately destroy their buzz, because it destroys all the opiates in the body. Another thing that you have to understand about opiate addiction is that, with the exception of benzodiazepine addiction, it's unique in that the withdrawal from opiates can be fatal. A lot of the other drugs, when people withdraw, they feel like they're going to die, or they act like they're going to die, but they really won't. Opiate withdrawal can kill you. So if you have a hardcore opiate addict that's a friend or a family member, experts will generally tell you that it's not good to cold turkey an opiate addict, because some of them will actually die from the withdrawal. The way the opioids bind to the dopamine receptors in the brain, it actually kind of rewires the brain where you need that substance. So a weaning period, weaning off these drugs, of opiates in general, is the better way to go most of the time than cold turkey. Another thing to remember, people that have, and this goes for everything but opiates, people that have addicts in their family get very frustrated, and they say things like, well, just quit doing heroin, just stop. Well, guys, it's not that easy. It doesn't work that way. Generally, from my experience, there are 3 ways that people come off of hardcore opiate addiction: prison, death, or long-term inpatient rehab. I don't mean the quick 48, 72-hour visit to the local hospital. I'm talking about long-term inpatient rehab where people go 3, 4, 5, 6 months to get clean. The issue with that is most of those rehab facilities are very expensive. But please keep in mind that this is an extraordinarily powerful addiction. People do need help to come off of opiates. And obviously we don't want to see prison or death as our choices. But just wanted to give you an overview of opiates in general, and now we can move into heroin and some of the pain pills. All right, like I said, we want to talk about 2 different opiates, heroin and pills, but let's start with heroin. Heroin is generally going to come as a brown, powdery substance. It does come in black tar form. You can see multiple different color variations of heroin, but for the most part, you're going to see a brown, powdery substance. For the end user, or things that you may be seeing, it's generally going to be packaged a couple different ways. One would be the clear little capsules that you can break in half and pour the contents out. Health food stores sell them empty so that people can make their own preparations and fill the capsules. One of those capsules will only have maybe 25% full, will be considered a full end user dose of heroin. More often than not, though, anymore, we're seeing the powder folded into paper. Discarded lottery tickets, little squares of paper. You put the powder in, they fold it multiple times, and they call it a pack or a bindle. These are called caps. So it comes in a number of different ways. Heroin, again, like I talked about before, water soluble, injectable, smokable, snortable, or eatable. But here's the thing. Most people start heroin by snorting it. That generally does not last very long. Even with your people that swear They would never inject a drug that they're scared to death of needles. They quickly find themselves injecting heroin. Once they've injected it the first time, they'll tell you you'll never go back to another delivery method because you feel like you're wasting your money. So when you're talking about needle-using heroin addicts, obviously, if you've got somebody in your family, you need to look for the needle marks, generally on their arms. But keep in mind, once people have used for long enough, their arms get wore out and they will inject just about anywhere. Where you or I would think, wow, you couldn't inject heroin there, it would be too painful. Trust me, they will do it. We've seen people in between their fingers and their necks. If you can imagine the location on the body, heroin users have probably injected there. Like I explained before, heroin, a very powerful opiate, not advisable to cold turkey that drug because the withdrawal can kill you. So what people do to mitigate the withdrawal symptoms are usually two drugs to help people get off of heroin, or really any other opiate for that matter. The first one would be methadone, which is an opiate in and of itself that they use to, it's drug replacement therapy, just like a nicotine patch or nicotine gum for smokers. But the whole point is to take the methadone, that becomes what they're using now, and then slowly wean them down to where they are at zero. Another newer option that you're seeing a lot more of is Suboxone, which is comes in a number of different forms. It comes in a pill or a sublingual strip, just like a Listerine pocket pack that dissolves under your tongue. And Suboxone is interesting in that it's kind of two drugs in one. One half of the pill, if you will, is naloxone or Narcan, which blocks all opiates. So if you are on Suboxone and you shoot heroin, the heroin will have no effect. It will not get you high. So it'll block any opioid interactions in the human body. The other half of that pill is a narcotic, not an opiate, but a narcotic similar to a codeine type product that helps people not get sick and feel the withdrawal symptoms as they try to get off heroin. Suboxone, if used as directed, will not give the user, it will not get them high. It simply takes away those radical withdrawal symptoms and then blocks any opiates that they may try to use while on the drug. So if used properly under the right direction, Suboxone can be a very good drug to help people break the addiction to heroin. In regards to withdrawal from an opiate, what's important to know is that opiate withdrawal is very, very hard. Addicts will tell you once they've been doing heroin for a while, a lot of times they're not doing it to get high anymore. They're doing it to keep from what they call getting sick. So you take heroin away from somebody and they start to go into withdrawal. It is very, very agonizing for them. Usually for 2 or 3 days, they will have severe stomach pains. They will puke. They'll curl up in a fetal position in the corner. They'll have shakes, vomiting, all different kinds of things. So the reason people continue this drug, not always is to get high. It's to avoid that awful withdrawal that comes along from going off of an opiate. And opiates are also, they are depressants. So usually when you see somebody on an opiate, very much like possibly somebody who's very drunk, they tend to nod off and want to fall asleep. And it's not like a cocaine where they're up wanting to run around the block. It's exactly the opposite. So you'll see opiate addicts after they've taken a recent dose of whatever their opiate of choice is, usually get very sedated and mellow and tend to nod off a lot. In regards to pharmaceutical opiates or pain pills, this is quickly becoming, in my opinion, a national epidemic, surpassing many of the other drugs. And people don't realize really how large of a problem this is. They think that if the pills are prescribed by a doctor, that they're okay, and that in many cases couldn't be further from the truth. Just an example, for many, many years in the state of Ohio, the leading cause of death for young people has always been suicide and car accidents. That's not the case anymore. It is accidental pharmaceutical overdose. And we are, at the last count, the 16th state to join those ranks. And I believe that if the trend continues, that will become the norm for the nation, that the #1 cause of death is accidental pharmaceutical overdose. And when I'm talking about pharmaceutical opiates, we're We're talking about pain pills, Dilaudid, oxycodones, OxyContins, Percocets, Percodans, fentanyl. The list goes on and on. There are hundreds of opiate-based pain pills. These pills are just like any of these other drugs. People think that they're not junkies because they're on pills or whatever it may be. There is a huge black market. People are buying, selling these pills, huge amounts of money involved. And a lot of the people, once they become involved with pill addiction, they don't take the pills like you or I would by mouth. They're generally going to crush them and snort them, or crush them and inject them, much like other substances. You can crush the substance, mix it with some water, heat it, and then you can inject it. Most of the pills you can still do that with. Some of the manufacturers have placed plastic crush-proof coatings on the pills to try to deter crushing and snorting, crushing and injecting. But with many of the pills, this still happens. Also be aware that a lot of the people who are now addicted to pain pills started off as legitimate, honest, hardworking people that were involved in car accidents or different things. They were placed on pain pills by their doctor. A few months later, they're cured, the pain pills are taken away, and now they can't stop. So they start stealing prescription blanks, etc. And I want to tell you guys, even through my own personal experience with medical issues, I've had doctors tell me that as long as you are using pain pills to treat legitimate pain, you cannot become addicted. I'm here to tell you that is not true. I have dealt with many, many addicts over the years that started as legitimate people. They weren't out trying to be bad guys or become addicts, but it slowly led them into that lifestyle, and ultimately they end up losing their homes, getting indicted for things they're doing to get more of these pills. And don't be surprised at the level of pills that people can take once they build a tolerance. You know, you or I, maybe we take just whatever, one OxyContin, one Dilaudid, one Percocet, and wow, we're loopy. But somebody who's built up a tolerance to this, I've dealt with people, it's not uncommon for them to be able to take 40, 50 Vicodin a day, 20, 30 Dilaudid a day, and function just like you or I. No different than an alcoholic who builds up a tolerance and drinks a case or two of beer a day. Here again, when you reach those levels of addiction, extraordinarily difficult to come off of those pills, and the same things apply as heroin. Remember, the pills, the heroin, virtually interchangeable. I always, in my mind, think of the pills as just pharmaceutical-grade heroin. So you have to treat it in the same thing. Another thing you need to be aware of with the pills is the tremendous amount of money. Let me give you an example. Let's just take OxyContin, for example. Usually on the street, it's going to vary, but about $1 a milligram. So if you have an 80 milligram OxyContin pill, that pill on the street is worth usually $60 to $80. OxyContin, 12-hour time release, 2 a day, so your normal prescription for a month is going to be 60 pills. So you think about it. 60, 80 milligram pills in one bottle at $60 to $80 a pill, do the math. You've got tremendous amounts of money. So what you have to remember, if you have these pills legitimately prescribed to you, you have to not advertise that they are in your home. We see a number of burglaries for pills, and even slicker yet, what will happen are there are groups of people that spend their time doing nothing but going from open house to open house to open house, because everybody knows the average guy keeps his pills behind the mirror in the bathroom, in the dresser beside his bed, or wherever. So people will go to all these open houses not to look at your house, but to steal your pills. So please don't advertise that these are in your house, and keep them hidden, because it's become a huge issue. And we've had so many people die from pharmaceutical overdose that we need to really start addressing this issue. All right, next up I want to talk about marijuana. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time with this drug. There are probably not a whole lot of things I can teach you. It's the one drug that people seem to know a lot more about than the others. But we will go over a few things. Pretty general knowledge. Marijuana is a plant, grows in the ground, sometimes on its own, sometimes planted by people. What you have to understand, though, is the vast majority of the marijuana found in the United States is brought here by Mexican cartels. So people that are buying an eighth, a dime, a quarter, whatever of weed truly are supporting these very violent cartels. The DEA has identified about 7 cartels that control the United States drug traffic. Marijuana is obviously a very large part of that. Another interesting thing about marijuana, and I call it this, although it's not the correct term, I call it the universal solvent. And I know that's not right, but what I mean by that is a lot of drugs seem to stick with particular races, classes, demographics of people. Marijuana doesn't seem to be that way. Young, old, black, white, whatever it may be, marijuana seems to transcend ages, genders, racial boundaries. So what I really want to show you are some interesting smoking devices that you will find with marijuana. What I want to, when you're looking at these, this is just a small fraction of what is out there. If you can imagine it, you can smoke weed out of it, generally speaking. But for you parents out there, I wanted to show you some of the common devices that you may miss. All right, the first one I want to show you is this highlighter. And as I go through these, all of these are readily available on the internet, and they're really very cheap. What's interesting about this highlighter, if you'll see, it actually does work and function as a highlighter. But if you pull off the end, it's a pipe. And you can smoke. Generally, people are going to smoke weed out of these type devices. In theory, you could smoke about anything you wanted to. But pretty neat. If you saw it in a book bag or whatnot, you would probably miss that. Another item, if you found in the bottom of a woman's purse, your daughter's purse maybe, that you would overlook, is this lipstick case. If you take it apart, it looks like lipstick. If you pull it apart even further, this is the mouthpiece. That's the smoking bowl. And you can smoke your marijuana out of your lipstick. Another one that's interesting, a Zippo lighter. When you open it, this device comes out, screws into the bottom. This section here is the smoking bowl, the mouthpiece, and you can smoke right through the lighter. Another interesting device would be this keychain flashlight that you see a lot of people carrying around. And what you do with this, take this piece off and set it to the side. This piece off. Take the back off. And this little clip here, if you rotate it, it exposes the hole. The bowl screws into there, and there you have your smoking pipe. And then it all goes back together, obviously. Here's one made to look like a spark plug. This one is quite simple in that you pull this top off and the bowl stays straight up. So you would have to smoke this way rather than this way. But another interesting device, if you had especially a male child with a toolbox and this was just thrown in there, you would probably not notice. Kind of in that same vein is this bolt. If you take the nut off of the bolt, it will reveal a small hole. This end of the bolt comes off, goes into the hole, and you have, again, another smoking pipe. So keep in mind, a lot of these items are relatively inexpensive, found easily online, also in brick and mortar traditional type stores. So just be aware that these items do exist and things you may be looking for with your children. One last thing about marijuana that I wanted to touch on briefly is there's this large debate over whether marijuana is a gateway drug or not. And for any of you people watching, I just wanted to give you my personal experience. Over the years, especially for about 5 years of my career, that's all I dealt with, was narcotics enforcement and drug addicts. And I've dealt with hundreds, if not thousands, of drug addicts. And when I sit down and talk to them, one thing I always was curious is I would ask them, when was the first time that you did heroin or cocaine or any other real drug type thing? And every single one of them, with the exception of one person, would tell you that the first time they tried a real drug, they were either high on marijuana or they were drunk or both. I only know of one person out of those hundreds or thousands that just thought on a particular day that smoking crack cocaine would be a great idea. But other than that, all of them will tell you that they were either drunk or high on weed when they did a real drug for the first time. So people argue this point back and forth. In my opinion, just based upon talking to all those people, that marijuana is in fact a gateway drug. All right, at this point I would like to talk about two different versions of cocaine, powder cocaine and crack cocaine. First, let's deal with powder cocaine. Generally going to come in a white powdered form. Again, a water-soluble drug. You can smoke it, snort it, eat it, inject it. With cocaine, it's interesting is that it's kind of all over the map with the preferred ingestion method. Most of the people will snort the drug, but you do find a number of people that inject or smoke it. And they don't generally smoke it by itself, although you can. If it's going to be smoked, it's going to be done so in a couple different ways. The first way would be to take the powder cocaine and sprinkle it onto another smoking substance, like a cigarette, a marijuana joint. They call them geek joints. And then you smoke the cigarette and the powdered cocaine at the same time. Another way that people do it, and this kind of goes for all of the powdered drugs that you can smoke, they do make specific smoking pipes, but what you'll find a lot of times is the way that people smoke these drugs, powder cocaine included, is a piece of tin foil, the powder cocaine on the tin foil, the heroin, the bath salt, whatever it may be, a little bit of water mixed in. You apply heat underneath the tin foil. The vapors come off of the substance, and then you inhale those vapors, usually through a hollowed out ink pen tube. People will take the guts out so you have a hollow plastic tube, and they use that to inhale the vapors as they come off the tin foil. It doesn't have to be tin foil, though. Any object that can support heat, a teaspoon, a tablespoon, tin foil, whatever it may be. But that's a lot of times how you'll find people smoking these drugs. Another interesting thing about powder cocaine, in contrast to crack cocaine, which we'll talk about next, is that some people do tend to maintain. They are powder cocaine addicts, and some of them still go to work, take care of their kids, and some of them are completely off the charts and can't do any of that. So you see a little blend, whereas with crack cocaine, people are almost always off the charts and never maintain. Powder, you see a blend of different types of people. But with that being said, let's move on to crack cocaine. And people sometimes get the two of them confused. Powder cocaine is water soluble. You can do anything with it. Without getting into specific recipes, what people do is take some powder cocaine, water, baking soda, mix them together and cook it, which then converts into crack cocaine, very much like an alcohol distillation process. You are taking all of the things from the powder cocaine you don't want and cooking them out, leaving you with cocaine base, the more purified form of the cocaine, which is your crack cocaine. When that cooking process occurs, something interesting happens. You go from a drug that is water soluble, powder cocaine, to a drug that is oil-based, crack cocaine. And why that's significant to you is the only thing you can do with crack cocaine is smoke it. So if people say, yeah, I saw this guy, he was shooting some crack, not possible. The only thing you can do with crack cocaine is smoke it, generally out of a crack pipe. Crack is going to usually look like a small, yellowish rock with porous holes through the rock, has the consistency of almost a hardened candle wax, meaning if you put the rock between your fingers, you can crush it and kind of smear it around on your hands. Another, with crack, you see a very specific type of paraphernalia associated with the drug, which is a crack pipe. Most crack pipes are going to be any hollow tube that can support heat. The two most popular, the first one would be a tube about this long that is metal and hollow. And what people will do is take the tube And in one end, you will stick some Chore Boy scouring pad and place it into the end of the tube. This acts as a filtration device, and so you just don't suck the rock down your throat as you inhale. You put the rock on top of the Chore Boy scouring pad. People will light the rock. As they light it, it tends to melt. Just very similar to candle wax, it will adhere to the scouring pad, turn the pipe straight, and then you can smoke the crack that way. You'll also see more veteran addicts, if you will. If they have some water by them, they'll put water on their fingers and flick it onto the crack rock because they don't want it to continue to melt down into the filter and basically waste the drug. So when you flip the water on it, it will re-harden the crack. And the other type of crack pipe that's very common are very similar glass tubes. You'll see many times if you go to your carry-outs, your convenience stores, up by the clerk you'll see a small display with little tiny roses inside of a glass vial. And the idea is that, you know, guys buy these for their girls. Really what happens most of the time is people buy these glass tubes, you take the rose out, throw it away, and it makes an excellent crack pipe. You'll see usually one end of the pipe wrapped in black electrical tape because as the pipe heats up, it'll burn the lips of the user. A couple things with crack cocaine. You know, when it came out, everybody called it poor man's cocaine. Not really accurate. Yes, the dosages are cheap. You know, to buy a rock depends on the portion of the country you're in. Around here, a rock, which is usually going to be about the size of a pencil eraser, $20 to $50, depending upon who you are and who you're buying it from. But the high from crack cocaine is very short, 5 to 15 minutes. So as soon as that's over, you want to buy another rock. I've talked to many crack addicts over the years, and they will all tell you if money were no object, they could easily smoke $900 to $1,000 worth of crack a day. So with that knowledge, it explains the massive spin-off crime that comes from this drug. People committing homicides, robberies, burglaries to get more of this drug. And I can tell you from a cop's perspective, that's kind of how I rate drugs in my mind. What type of spin-off crime does it create? Does a guy smoke weed and then think, you know, I need to rob a liquor store to get more? No. A guy smokes crack and then has thoughts like that. That's why you see so much spin-off crime off of things like crack cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, etc. Another thing to keep in mind with crack addiction, very similar to heroin addiction, is it's terribly hard for people to break. The withdrawal is not fatal as the opiates can be, but there again, if you're dealing with a crack addict in your friends, family circle, it's not as easy as telling them, hey, just quit smoking crack. They're generally going to need some sort of intervening factor to be able to stop. They will have, as with all of these drugs, brief moments, I call them an epiphany, where they do well for 2-3 days, 2-3 weeks, sometimes even a few months. But most of the time you have to understand that these people, without some intervention type factor, will smoke crack for 20, 30 years and not be able to stop. All right, let's move on to crystal methamphetamine or meth. Usually going to come as a white powder, very similar to cocaine. To an untrained eye, you may mistake meth for cocaine, for powdered cocaine. Once you've seen enough of them, you will see that meth actually has a more pearlescent, crystalline quality to it than cocaine. And if you put them side by side, you can tell the difference between the two of them most of the time. You've heard a lot on the news, I'm sure, about meth labs and the cooking process. And what I want everybody to understand that's important is most people that are not in the drug world think of a meth lab as a very elaborate laboratory with beakers and bottles and vials. The meth labs that I've been in and that you find throughout the country generally are not like that. The term laboratory is a bit deceiving. Sometimes you might find a beaker, a vial, but many times that's not the case. And a meth lab can be in a very small location. We found in this region meth labs under the trunks or under the hoods of vehicles, in closets, all kinds of different places. So don't think of it as this massive sophisticated laboratory, because many times that's not the case. Things to look for associated with a meth lab, a lot of times, there's a couple different cooking methods which we'll go into, but one of the more common involves a whole host of chemicals that you may find if you suspect a house or whatnot. You'll see things like anhydrous ammonia, red devil lye, starting fluid, lithium batteries, your photo style lithium batteries. And the sides of those, there's actually a lithium strip that people will take a knife and pop that lithium strip out, and that's used in the cooking process. Also, many cold tablets that contain pseudoephedrine are used in the cooking process. So if you are in a residence or around a residence and you see all of these items laying around, usually just kind of discarded, that may be a tip-off that you're dealing with a meth lab. The other thing is the smell. For me, every meth lab I've been around smells very strong like ammonia or cat urine, and within a short time I can't hardly tolerate. The smell usually gives a lot of the meth labs away. Again, a powdered water-soluble substance, ingested all the different ways I've explained. They do, as far as paraphernalia, they do make meth pipes, but usually to smoke the substance, like I've explained before, the tinfoil, the meth, the water, the heat, suck up the vapors, is usually how it's done. Another type of paraphernalia that you do see fairly often are light bulbs. If you take a light bulb and flip it upside down, people will break a little hole in the bulb, take the guts out, or leave them in, but then you've basically got a small glass bowl. You can put the meth and the water into the light bulb, heat the bulb, swish it around, heat it, the vapors will come out of the hole you've broken into it, and you can ingest the vapors that way. So if you are seeing these items around, these are things that should be suspect to you. Some interesting things about meth that are a little bit different from some of the other drugs. It's an extraordinarily powerful appetite suppressant. It actually increases the caloric burning within the body, or the burning of calories. So you'll see people go for days and days and days without eating and losing a lot of weight, even if they're not doing anything. Strictly the ingestion of the meth will cause you to burn a whole lot more calories than normal. Another interesting thing, especially in females, is that meth will increase their sex drive to the point that female meth users report thousands of partners over the years. So before, and this is usually the section where I'm doing this live, that all the husbands ask where they can buy some meth for their wives. But before you go out and do that, the downside, just so numerous to list, you'll find it's not uncommon for people to stay awake for 12, 13, 14 days straight and encounter a whole host of problems. It's interesting, the physiology, the way meth works in the brain, is it puts everything that should be primary secondary. Your need for food, a lot of your survival instincts become secondary. People don't bathe, they do a lot of things they wouldn't normally do. And I don't really understand the physiology behind it, but it does lead to a whole host of gum and dental problems, as you've all seen. Interesting website. If you internet search the faces of meth, you can see the progression of people through booking photos of when they were starting 2 months later, a year later, 2 years later, and the progression of their actual appearance over the course of time. So just a few things to keep in mind with meth, and next we'll move on to benzodiazepines. Okay, another class of pharmaceutical drugs that you need to be aware of are called benzodiazepines. Most people simply call them benzos. These are pills prescribed to you by your doctor. So there again, people have this misconception that there is no danger if prescribed medically, that they're okay. And that's not always the case. There are hundreds of benzodiazepines available, but the three that you've probably heard of that are most common, at least in American society, are Ativan, Valium, and Xanax. Xanax, one of the most widely abused prescription pills in the United States. Another issue with this class of drugs is that people get on them usually for legitimate medical purposes. Things like anxiety is a very big one. A number of different legit disorders. They don't get on benzos to become drug addicts, but they quickly find themselves unable to leave these drugs alone. Another issue is benzodiazepines mixed with other drugs. cause all kinds of issues. And very similar to the opiates, benzodiazepine withdrawal can be fatal. Believe it or not, people don't believe that a hardcore Xanax addict, that you take it away from them and they can die, or Ativan, Valium, but they certainly can. So not advisable to generally cold turkey off of benzodiazepines, more something that you want to wean down with. And if you get with your doctor, they can usually help you with a taper schedule to help you get off those drugs. Don't get discouraged. A lot of times the taper schedule can be 3 to 6 months long before you are effectively done with that drug. It just takes time, but something that you probably don't want to quit cold turkey, and just another class of drugs for you to be aware of. All right, next up we'll talk about lysergic acid diethylamide, or LSD, discovered in 1938, and it is the most powerful hallucinogenic known to man. The way this is going to come, generally speaking, are on small square sheets of paper. The manufacturer produces it as a liquid and then drops it onto these squares of paper. The paper is always going to have some sort of design on it so that people can differentiate between the different types of LSD, some being, I guess, more preferred or a better dose than others. Some interesting things about LSD that I guess a lot of people don't realize is that you'll find people that are savvy LSD users will not swallow the paper with tap water because chlorine can destroy the LSD in the paper. Now, if they don't swallow it, they just put it under their tongue and let it sit there for a while, that's not an issue. But for people that use the paper and just swallow it, you'll find them doing it with pop or some other liquid other than tap water. Another interesting thing, the way that LSD interacts with the body is you have to wait 3 to 4 days between doses for it to be effective, meaning you take LSD on a Friday and then on a Saturday, the Saturday dose is generally going to be ineffective. The way that it binds and interacts with the brain is it quickly builds up a tolerance. So even a chronic LSD user, if you will, probably not going to use it much more than once a week. Another interesting note for you employers out there, parents out there, another one of the drugs that is generally not going to be detected upon a drug screen. So if you suspect LSD use in a kid, an employee, things like that, you're going to have to go to an alternative screening method than what is traditionally used. Kind of in the same mode here, let's talk about psilocybin mushrooms, or mushrooms. They are exactly what they appear to be, mushrooms that grow in the ground. There are over 90 different species of psilocybin mushrooms, generally dried out and delivered to the end user as a whole dried mushroom. And then people can eat those mushrooms just straight out of the bag, if you will. They can put them into different food preparations, blend them into teas. But an experienced mushroom user will know that high temperatures destroy the psilocybin in the mushrooms. So generally it will be blended into a cold tea or a cold food preparation. Again, a hallucinogenic substance, and very similar to LSD in that you need to wait 3 to 4 days between doses for those doses to be effective. So parents, if your kids, if you suspect them of using mushrooms, even if they're using them a lot, probably not more than about once a week for this drug, that the even hardcore user will use it. And again, another drug that is not commonly found in drug screens. You're going to look to alternative methods if you suspect psilocybin mushroom use. Now at this point, I want to talk to you about ecstasy. In my opinion, one of the more interesting drugs of the list. Ecstasy is almost always going to come in pill form, very similar to the very small bite-sized sweet tarts that you see. Ecstasy always has some sort of an imprint cutout design on it so that users can differentiate, very much like LSD, the preferred doses over the stuff that's not as popular. So you will see actually imprinted into the pill maybe a star or a moon or a shamrock, and then when people are at gatherings where ecstasy is being sold, if there are 3 dealers, they can differentiate between which dealer has the better product. A couple interesting things that about ecstasy, people tend to categorize this drug as a sexual drug, and really that's not the case. Ecstasy users report that when they take ecstasy, that everything feels better, that to touch the skin, to do these things feels a lot better, but they're not necessarily interested in sex. You will see things that people will take the Vicks inhalers and blow the vapors into each other's eyes because it feels good. But here are some of the problems with ecstasy. Ecstasy inhibits your body's ability to sweat. Generally, these drugs are taken in rave-type settings. So you have to picture, you've got hundreds of people packed into a room, the music's going, people are dancing, they're hot, they're sweaty. Obviously, your body's own cool-down mechanism is sweating. Ecstasy will inhibit your body's ability to sweat, thereby increasing your body temperature. This is how ecstasy death usually occurs. There are core body temperatures documented at 113 degrees from ecstasy use. A couple other things, it also inhibits your body's ability to know that you have to pee. When you have to go pee, your body delivers a hormone to your brain that gives you that feeling, and ecstasy will cause that not to occur. So people have a buildup of urine in the bladder that can lead to toxicity issues, spillover issues, things like that. And the way ecstasy works is unique. When you are happy or sad, it's usually dependent upon the levels of serotonin in your brain. Your brain is supposed to release serotonin at a flat kind of drip, drip, drip kind of level. So in theory, you should always be at the same mood. We know everybody, we all know people that their moods are all over the map, probably due to serotonin distribution issues. But what ecstasy does is it takes all of your body's serotonin stores and dumps them into your brain immediately. So rather than drip, 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 it's a flood of serotonin into your brain. And people report that when that happens, they are the happiest they've ever been. And I've asked people, I said, well, describe it to me. And they say, well, Kyle, think about whatever it is that would make you the happiest you could ever be, and that is the equivalent, especially from your first time ecstasy use. Another interesting thing is that when that happens, when all of that serotonin is dumped into the brain at once, let's just say on a Friday night, it takes the body about 3 days to begin rebuilding those levels. And they have a terminology, people call it Monday or Tuesday morning suicide, because sometimes ecstasy users on about day 3 after using get extraordinarily depressed, and that's because they have no serotonin to put them in that good elevated mood. Now, the body eventually builds that back up and the cycle continues with extended ecstasy use. Another thing is with chronic use after multiple years, if you look at PET scans of the brain of a chronic ecstasy user, you'll see holes very similar to what you see in Swiss cheese develop in the brains of chronic users. So some people try to sell this drug as harmless and that it has no consequence, but that's truly not the case. All right, at this point, let's talk about ketamine or Special K. What that is it is a injectable liquid veterinary anesthetic. What people do most of the time is take the liquid anesthetic and dry it out to derive the powdered form of this drug. And then this drug can be ingested a number of different ways, but most of the time it is going to be snorted. Some of the attraction to this drug would be the high that it produces is very, very short, 30 to 45 minutes. People have been known to do this drug over their lunch break, be back to normal, to come back to work after the high is gone. What's interesting is when people do this drug, what they're trying to achieve is what they call the K-hole, which in Special K use or ketamine use, there are 4 plateaus that you can achieve, with the 4th being the most profound. And what happens in the 4th plateau is that people experience a dissociative or out-of-body type experience. There is a website that covers a lot of things, but one of the things they cover is ketamine use and specific amounts for your body weight, meaning people that have never tried before can go to this website and say, hey, I'm a male of this weight, this build. This is the plateau that I want to reach. How much ketamine do I need to do? Because the problem is, if you do too much, generally induces strokes and death. So they're trying to find that fine line between strokes and death and the fourth plateau. This is not a substance that's easily found on the streets. Usually when you see burglaries of veterinary clinics, this is what they are looking for. Not a substance that, at least in my experience, that law enforcement runs into a lot, but another one of the things that is out there and that you do need to be aware exists. All right, now we just spoke about ketamine, which is an anesthetic, which moves us on to the next thing, which is phencyclidine, or PCP, originally developed in 1926 as an anesthetic for human beings. So many issues and problems with this drug, though, that by 1956, the government had banned its use as an anesthetic. This is one of those drugs that has been glamorized. I think everybody's heard of it, but in modern times, at least from my perspective and my colleagues in law enforcement, a drug that is very rarely seen. After it was banned as an anesthetic in '56, it reappeared in pill form and was marketed as the peace pill during the Haight-Ashbury era, but it didn't seem to last very long. A lot of users report not liking the effects of this drug, and its popularity has greatly decreased or waned over the years. And what law enforcement has found, a lot of times drugs that are purported as PCP are not. Once they're tested at the laboratory, they find that they contain other substances. So this is one of those drugs that you hear a lot about, people talk a lot about, but the police, at least in this region of the country, very rarely see. It is noted for kind of the superhuman strength that people have while on this drug. And speaking with other officers from around the region, around the country that have dealt with people on this drug, they do say that the interesting thing is you can't hardly hurt them. When these people are kind of going crazy, etc., and the police are trying to subdue them, that it's very difficult to do so because they literally feel little or no pain. So another drug, like some of these others that you need to be aware of, hopefully not something that you encounter in your personal life, but just be aware of its existence, and it is out there. Guys, I'd like to thank you very sincerely for the time you've spent with me, and I sincerely hope as well that you've learned a great deal of knowledge that you can now apply to personal situations within your life. And I also encourage you to check out the rest of the website. There are things on the home page as far as drug symptomology matrices, drug detection times, and slang terms, also links to things that may be of assistance to you. So thanks again for visiting the website, and I hope you enjoyed the video.